Welcome to the Crackin Backs podcast, where we walk through the foundations of health and wellness, literally. Today, we're joined by one of the world's leading authorities on feet, gait analysis and the science of footwear, Dr. Courtney Conley. From how your shoes shape for your own longevity to the barefoot movement and even some, controversial issues like fashion versus function. Dr. Conley will challenge what you think you know about your foundation, which is your feet. Get ready to walk away with insights that could change your health from the ground up. Let's face up and step into it. Conley, welcome to our show. You are considered one of the top experts when it comes to feet and gait analysis. To start it off, we want to ask you about feet, but I do got to preface a few things. I go, this whole program is going to be talking about feet and footwear, and I'm not going to call footwear sneakers because my co-host and I have been battling as to what the heck do you call. He says, "Go ahead, Dr. Terry. What's your deal with the word sneaker?"
He wrote me something about sneakers. And I go, I don't think anybody on the West Coast, or especially in California, has used the term sneakers in 20 years. And then he sent me an article today that quoted, well, the guy was wearing sneakers. And I'm like, who the hell uses the term sneakers? So we've been battling back and forth thinking that's an East Coast term now because they haven't caught up to the 24th century. And California is ahead of the curve. We have a better word than sneakers that my father used. So you're in Colorado. What do you think? Because you're on the west side of the Mason-Dixon line. So what do you say? Do they still use the word sneakers in Colorado?
Well, I actually grew up in Pittsburgh, so we called them tennis shoes. Everything was a tennis shoe.
Right. We still say sometimes tennis shoes, or say shoes or athletic shoes or footwear, but we don't use the term sneakers. Do you use the term sneakers?
I've never said sneakers. Never said sneakers.
Cool. All right. Hold on. Now, I came up with I've heard them called trainers. I heard some of my thug guys call them kicks. Yo, bro, what about your kicks, man? And then there's high tops, low tops, pumps, sneakers, which I call, and then tennises. I've heard tennis. Yo, those are nice white tennises, man. So I don't know.
It is very interesting, and actually, it brings up a very good point because in our world right now, I'm part of a research study that's actually defining what the word maximalist shoe means versus minimalist shoe, and so it's really the terminology with everything is getting quite specific because they are two very different animals when it comes to footwear.
Well, we were also mentioning there's a difference in language, East Coast, West Coast, North and South. So they all have cultural words that are used, and it's not universal. You go to other parts of the country and provinces have different terms, and it may be English, but they use different words, different phrases. So it's kind of a cultural world, and we were just laughing because the West Coast doesn't use it, the East Coast does, and I thought that was kind of cool, actually.
Footwear? Are we going to call it footwear or shoe?
No, you're wrong. So you just have to move on.
Dr. Conley, tell me what will we be referring to the covering over a foot?
Footwear.
Thank you. All right.
Whatever you guys want to call it, I'm fine with, because we'll probably redefine anything anyway.
What we're doing is, all right, well, back to the regularly scheduled program. Dr. Conley, my girlfriend, Karen Slota, Dr. Karen Slota, is a huge fan of yours after watching you on Peter Attia.
You
are such a great educator. You're so fluent with the biomechanics of foot, and we couldn't wait to get you on. So how did it all get started, and your approach to feet and foot? Shoe, or whatever you want to call the damn thing.
I think when there's an interest, a passion about something. It always comes with a personal quest on the back end of it. I was a ballet dancer for many, many years, and then I converted to becoming a triathlete, and I had a lot of foot issues, and I went to chiropractic school, and I was searching for ways that, I could help myself. And I loved movement, was always a very big part of my life. And then I went to chiropractic school, and I think we had about maybe a half a semester on foot and ankle mechanics. And I got out of school, and I worked in several orthotic labs, and we were making a lot of orthotics for our patients. And, that's kind of how this whole thing got started. My pain per se, I was always kind of chasing it around. And then I kept thinking to myself, we treat everywhere else in the body differently than we treat the foot. And why are we doing that? And I was very intrigued by that, considering that our foot is the only interface we have with the ground that keeps us upright and balanced. It's basically what, enables us to be a biped. So I was very interested in that, and why we weren't looking at it from how can this part of our bodies get stronger? How can it become more mobile, and how that can impact the rest of the kinetic chain? So I started searching, and here we are.
I read many years ago that the moment your foot hits the ground, everything could go wrong or it could go right, and, there's a lot of talk about how, footwear has evolved over the years. Oh, I called it footwear. All right.
There you go.
Just natural. I love it. All right. So like you said, from minimalist shoes to highly cushioned option, how do you advise individuals on, I want to just right out of the starting blocks.
Yeah, I love this conversation.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I'm doing a lot of research now. I'm writing a book on walking. And when you look at how our footwear has changed over the years, it was initially used for just a protective covering. So from the elements, from weather, and it was just like a moccasin type piece of footwear. And then over the years, it's transitioned. And in the 14th and 15th centuries, I find this really interesting. It was the introduction of cracows and poulaines, those really pointy medieval kind of boots.
Mm-hmm.
And those were worn by people that were higher in the socioeconomic areas. So everyone kind of wanted to emulate that. And there's really cool research looking at, they dug up the skeletal remains of these people that wore those shoes. And they noticed an increase in hallux valgus, or bunions, with the introduction of that footwear.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And so we were getting all of these, indications that footwear can impact the structure of our foot, but we've let fashion kind of override function. Yeah. And I really think that's had an impact on what's happening. So when I'm advising patients on what type of footwear, the simplest thing I say to them is look at a foot that's healthy, which is hard to find these days, by the way. That's what the shoe should look like. Mm-hmm. It should be widest at the toes. I'm going to bring out Eddie. This is Eddie.
Hi, Eddie. Hello, Eddie.
I'm a very big Pearl Jam fan, so I've named my foot
Love it.
Eddie.
Is Vetter the tibia?
Yeah, that's a good point. I should start naming the bones after everything. My dog's name is I have a little golden doodle too, and my dog's name is Hallux. So
nice.
There's a lot of we got a lot of skin in the game going on over here.
I love it. Oh, that's great. I love it.
But when you're looking at a shoe, it should be widest at the toes.
Right.
It should be flat and flexible. So the heel and the toe sit in the same plane. And the shoe should move. Our foot moves. Our big toe moves. 65 degrees, 40 in the walking gait cycle. So the footwear should allow for the foot to do what it was designed to do, which is to splay and to move. And if you look at the majority of footwear out there, and I think we have a lot of work to do, the footwear does not look like a foot.
I got to inject something really quick, Spence. How do you, because this is right down my alley. I always say that you need to pay attention to below the knee, so above the knee is healthy. But all the time, I will say exactly what you're saying to a woman, and they're like, yeah, but those shoes aren't cute. How do you get past that something that's been around since, like you just said, the 12th century? I mean, they still wear those pointed shoes, and I call them cockroach killers because you can get into the corner of a room. But how do you get past that thought process where if a woman's going out for a nice evening, or a man, that they totally throw out that and they think that is cute and this is ugly?
I think this is why I'm so passionate about education, because I think if people understood the consequences of what happens, we don't really think about it in our 20s and 30s. We're walking around in heels. We're, doing all the things. And this doesn't exclude men. My brother lives in New York City. His shoes are pointier than some of the women that I work with.
Right.
You don't think about those things then. But the majority of my patients in their 40s, in their 50s, I hear it all the time. I wish I knew what wearing that type of footwear then would have done to my feet, because it alters their walking gait. It causes changes in the structure of the foot. So bunions, hammer toes. From a longevity perspective, that is a problem. Because once you have bunions or hammer toes, your increases of falls, your fall risk increases, your balance changes. So there's a lot of implications from this. And I think if we educate, and this is, I call it a shoe spectrum, right, Dr. Terry? I'm not asking people to wear, as my daughter would say, platypus footwear all the time. Okay. It's just have a shoe spectrum. If you have to wear high heels because you want to go on a date or you want to, get dressed up, fine. But if you know that, for the rest of the day or when you get out of those shoes, do the right things and just balance it. And I think that, when I started doing this, there was one company that was making functional footwear. Now, 15 years later, there's got to be, there are thousands now.
Right.
So the education is getting out there. People are getting smarter. When you start wearing footwear that feels good,
right,
you want more of it. So it's not a hard sell. And the fashion is coming. It's coming.
Interesting. You mentioned about fashion. I for many years, I lectured on some of the bad habits that we have simple bad habits we have during the day, like high heel shoes. And delving into the history of the high heel, where did that come from? But of course, a man, and you mentioned about socioeconomic levels, but I saw images of the toe coming to a point, and the longer the shoe, the more status you carried along with the heel. And I thought, that can't be possibly comfortable. And at that point in that century, it was, they would suffer and they couldn't walk because it wasn't functional. So how would you tell somebody? Now, you did mention about the forefoot and how the toe box needs to be, needs to allow the foot to conform to its natural position. But what about the rest of the shoe? And how would you tell somebody that needs to get a running shoe to what to look for?
I think if we're going to win this battle, which I've thought about often, you have to meet people where they are. So if you have been wearing, a certain type of shoe, a lot of cushion, a lot of support, an orthotic, you have to have the conversation where this shoe is doing a lot of the work for you. There's no doubt when you put your foot into a shoe that has toe spring or support, that it's going to feel better. It's designed to. They're often called recovery sandals for a reason. So people put them on their feet and they're like, wow, this feels great. But I always say, no one gets a free lunch. So if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And there's a lot of research. Dan Lieberman talks about this, that when you have toe spring, for example, you lose the intrinsic strength of the foot because the shoe is doing the work for you. So I have to say to people, we're going to slowly work your way into more functional footwear. So we might start them off on a shoe that has a wide toe box. That's kind of my non-negotiable. And it can still have stack height. It can still have a heel to toe drop. And then we're working on things like, if they've been in a high heel for many years, their posterior compartment of their leg, so their calf muscles, for example, might be shortened. They might have weak feet. So we're going to work on all of these things as I slowly transition them. So I will meet them where they are rather than saying, shoe shame people. We don't want to shoe shame people. It won't work.
Right.
So we need to gradually meet them where they are, give them, empowerment and do these things. And then they start to feel better. And then the conversation switches. I really like wearing these shoes. And then it makes the transition much easier, and it makes sense. It just makes sense.
No, that's true.
In clinical practice, I remember seeing women tear their calf muscle, and they would wonder why, and then you'd find out that they work all day in a high heel. Would you see that, and how would you advise a woman to, or? I mean, high heels are, typical amongst women that are into that fashion. But how would you advise someone to transition from there?
If that has been an environment that they have been in for very long, it is a slow transition. Anything worth doing takes time. So we'll put them on whatever is necessary. Oftentimes with the calf, when you see calf strains, it's highly correlated with a weakness in the foot. So, for example, if I'm walking forward, you'll often see people kind of toe gripping, right? As they push off. It's why I'm not a big fan of exercises like picking up a marble or, grabbing a washcloth. That's a compensation pattern that most of us can do very well unless we've had a surgery or a boot or what have you. But if I'm doing this all the time, I'm changing the structure or the function and the muscle tension relationship at my foot and at my calf. So for those people that have calf issues or, calf strains, we're working on strength of the foot and then mobility and or strength at the calf.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's fascinating because that was a typical protocol rehab for, picking up marbles. I remember at Miami Dolphins, they would have a tray of marbles and they'd just roll them out onto the floor and the player would sit there and just, move the marbles or bunch up a towel or move tissues over. I mean, when would you do that?
There's always a time and a place. There's a time and a place for orthotics. There's a time and a place for certain surgeries. And there's a time and a place for that type of rehabilitation. But if we get specific and you really start to assess what the client is doing at their foot, I think we will see that a lot of us actually have good long toe flexor strength as it is a compensation versus long extensor strength, for example. In the gait cycle, this doesn't happen. Right. At heel strike, everything is more in a lengthened position.
Right.
So I always take things back to function. What are we trying to accomplish here?
Right. Oh, I love this.
So
I got one question before we move on to going into gait cycle. I want to kind of go back a little bit in the fashion. I had a model that come in and she was so excited that she finally made enough money to buy these high heel shoes with a I'm not going to say the brand name, but it's got a black shoe with a red bottom. And they're very,
Yes.
very, very expensive. And she was so excited to get these shoes, and yet every time she wore them, her feet killed her. But it was such a
Yes.
status symbol to have these shoes, and they're so expensive. And I went, "Is it worth the amount of money I go, you either, like anything, pay for health or you can pay for illness, but how do we get this fashion trend to actually, or I guess you've answered that by just time, but where these people aren't spending thousands of dollars on a shoe that's killing them."
I mean, I think with everything, it's the funding behind it. And that's why we have to get this education out there. I was just teaching at the running event in Austin. So it's a big event that they have every year. All the footwear companies are there. And when I landed, there's thousands of people there. And I was walking around, I'm like, it's like an alien invasion of footwear. Everything was like, there's springs and there's, some of these shoes were 50 millimeters off the floor. And I'm sitting there going, what is happening right now? Like,
Wow.
and it's like the super shoe. And it's kind of the thing. But there is a time and a place. There is a time and a place to wear a super shoe. It gives you 2 to 4% running economy because there's things built within the shoe. So if you want to line up to, win a marathon, you're going to say to somebody, don't wear this shoe when the guy next to you has a 2 to 4% increase in their economy. You have to work with them. Same with the fashion thing. If you want to wear this shoe, you can't make a functional footwear shoe a high heel. It's just never going to work. So you have to be able to have these conversations and say, this is a short period of time. Wear the shoe to win the race. Wear the shoe to go out to dinner. Wear these other types of footwear for the majority of the rest of your day.
Are you referring to a super shoe? Is there a super shoe, or you're just referring to a shoe being super?
So there's in the running world, the super shoe are the shoes now that have the carbon plates. Mm-hmm. They have certain materials and densities to the shoe that basically can, act almost as a spring to spring people forward. And it does increase. There's no question. It's a performance shoe, but it does things like increases stride length. It changes gait mechanics, which if you don't have a strong calf, if you don't have a strong hamstring, for example, those are the types of injuries that pop up when you just throw those shoes on and think, hey, I'm going to become a super runner in my super shoe. You have to earn your right. I always say that. You have to earn your right to wear a super shoe. You have to earn your right to wear a high heel out to dinner, or you're going to pay for it.
Wow. Do you love those finger shoes, the ones that were each individual?
Talk about fashion.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, my wife hates those.
They seem biomechanically sound, but they never really caught on.
Yeah, so Vibram 5-finger, the 5-fingered shoes. Yeah. It's allowing the toes to splay, to have dexterity. I don't think those will ever, from a fashion perspective. I live in Colorado. We see people on the trails with those all the time.
I walk my dog in them. Yeah.
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 Good idea.
So, but I love the fashion questions because that is the biggest battle that I face.
I got another question for you on that, because I got in this discussion after the Olympics when they were talking about the super shoe and how all the winners were wearing them. And I went, it's the same problem they were started having with the suits in swimming, they were custom fit for these guys, and it gives them that 1% edge. And while at the Olympics, 1% is the difference between a gold medal and 10th place. Well, there's a lot of countries that can't afford them because they're very expensive suits. Yeah. And the super shoes are very expensive. Do you ever see a problem with these other countries, these third world countries, where they can't afford them? Or do you see that the sponsors or people will always supply at that level those shoes for those people?
It's a great question. I think Gait is so environmentally and culturally influenced. And, at those levels, everybody's getting sponsored. Mm-hmm. Everybody's getting sponsored by, certain companies. I do think that there are companies out there now that are realizing the impact. And I like working with these companies because they realize the impact of what they're doing today is going to have a result of what they're doing in the future. And I like having that awareness. And those are the companies that care. Right. They care not only about the success of the athlete, but also the success of the person. And that to me is, extremely important. But at those high levels, I've had certain schools and coaches that I would say, can you please not wear that footwear? And they're like, I have to wear this footwear if I'm on campus. Mm-hmm. So I write a lot of letters.
Wow. That's good.
And the airlines, I write a lot of letters to airlines because it wasn't until recently that the flight attendants had to wear a certain heeled shoe in the airport.
Yeah.
On the airplanes. And these women were, they're coming to me with neuromas and forefoot pain. And I'm like, this is bizarre. This is antiquated. You should not have to wear a high heel, especially if A, you don't want to, or B, your foot hurts.
Right.
I think of how the stiletto was, first of all, how do you balance on a little heel that's like this big, and yet that was such a high fashion statement,
It takes practice.
How do you know this?
Practice.
Okay, moving right along. Okay, I don't want you to be wearing your red bottoms or whatever those things are called.
Do you know how long I saved for those?
I think one way around the stiletto conversation, and this is the conversation I have with my 13-year-old.
Listen closely, Dr. Terry.
Is strong is the new sexy.
Yeah.
And that is the verbiage that I'm using as she's starting to, talk to me about all this, is that especially from a female perspective, strong is the new sexy. And that is where I'm hoping we can switch the script with some of this, especially for our women.
Yeah.
All right. So back to athletics. So we know that, for, professional athletes, like some of those that you work with, the Phoenix Suns or the New York Yankees, how do you find that footwear affects their performance or injury prevention?
It's really interesting to me with some of these teams that they don't have a foot person. Because the majority that I work with, there is not a foot person on staff. And especially if you look around the professional sports world, we are building jet engines. So very big, strong athletes on paper airplanes. We're not paying attention to their foot. And if you look at a walking and a running gait, when you're walking, you have 4 to 6 times your body weight going through your foot. When you start running, those numbers can jump up to 11 times your body weight. The good news is our foot was designed to handle those types of loads. The bad news is we're not training them to do so. So with these athletes, you're not going to, some of them like the snug cleat. Some of them you have to have tools for the trade. And I understand that. But when you're not in the cleat, or maybe you have a different practice cleat, you better be looking at your foot strength. you better be looking at your calf strength or your plantar flexion strength. That's push off.
Right.
So, training your everters, by the way, so peroneus brevis, for example, increases speed. We know that. So when we get specific about how we train the foot and ankle, you're going to see increases in performance. And I think of it as stacking. Let's go back to the super shoe, for example. If I have a shoe that gives me 2 to 4% running economy, and I have a strong foot and ankle, there's research that will also show you that plyometric training, so jumping, sprinting, things like that, will also give you 2 to 4% running economy. I take a strong body, a strong foot, a strong ankle, and then I put it on top of the super shoe on race day. You're going to feel like you're, running on an engine. I'm always cautious about saying injury prevention. I think sometimes you just have a bad day, right? But the better prepared you are, then when you stack these therapies, then you can get the results that you're looking for. And that's where I think we need to put the focus on. And then when you're not on game day, you're in a completely different scenario. You're building foot and ankle strength. And that's when you're going to see the results you're looking for.
I think a great metaphor as you're describing this is when a batter goes up to bat, he puts the weight on the end of the bat and swings it around to get a feel for how hard it is. And then when he gets up there, when he gets up there to actually bat, it feels like a toothpick that he's swinging. So that makes a whole lot of sense. And I think that it's a great way to deliver to our patients some of what you're describing is perfect. Now, you comment on injury prevention, and Dr. Terry, I don't remember who, I think it was Dr. Tim Hewitt, our guest, or they taught, or was it Gary Gray? Anyway, they refer to risk reduction instead of injury prevention. I thought,
love it.
Man, what a beautiful way to put it. Risk reduction. You can't always prevent something, but you can reduce the risk. So
I love that.
Start adopting that nomenclature as well.
Yeah.
Moving into the idea of Achilles tendon injuries, one of the or just simply ankle sprains. Two of the things that still continues to this day is when you're dealing with a sponsor for a big team like, I almost said the name. Never mind. But when you're dealing with a big sponsor, like for the NFL, I remember several years ago, guys were coming in to our athletic trainers with ankle sprains, and it was preseason, and our head athletic trainer had the wherewithal to realize that there was a trend going on with the cleats, and he made a call to to our big sponsor or the contact person and says, we are returning all the cleats that you have provided us as standard issue. They're causing an increased frequency of ankle sprains, and we haven't even started the season yet. And they had to send in a completely different a better pair of cleats as standard issue. Aside from the obvious thing that ballet slippers are horrible to the feet, because I know you know firsthand. Can you make some comments about cleats? And I think that the cleat is probably one of the most neglected footwears ever.
Well, I'm curious. Do you know what they changed in the structure of that cleat that changed the mechanics of it?
No, that was several years ago. I was even surprised that they noticed that, but I don't.
I think with any type of footwear, when we keep trying to make the footwear do more, you're going to run into issues. Rather than focusing on what we're putting into the cleat, for example. When we start changing, when you think about, I don't know what they did to change the structure of the cleat, but if you look at the base of support of the cleat, if things are tapered, right, and it provides a platform where the foot can't feel balanced, If there's a lot of footwear, they will put changes to the medial aspect of the shoe, because everybody's trying to do what? Pronation. We've demonized pronation in this world. It's like, you have a flat foot, you better put something under it. And if you look at current research that came out in 2023, it's basically challenging our biases to everything we have been taught about. If I have a flat foot, it's bad. If you have a flat foot, you better put something under it. So the foot has to recoil. The arch has to change shape. So when we start designing footwear, cleats that start to prevent some of this from happening, you're changing what the foot was supposed to do. And I really think you start altering foot mechanics there. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration.
That's so important. I got one thing on that, because at the school I work, it's a D1 school, and now we have NIL money coming in. You also have these pros; they're getting huge footwear sponsorships. What happens if you get a sponsorship that's giving you a lot of money, and these kids are putting these shoes on, and their feet are killing them? Have you had experience with dialogue of how to navigate out of this, where they can talk to their foot sponsors or whatever, and how to find this fine tune between being forced to wear something for money, but it kills their feet?
Yes. And typically what we have to do is custom. So we can have discussions depending upon status, because some of these guys, they really want in their shoes. So we will have discussions with, can you make the toe box wider? Can you alter the shoe to customize it to better fit what's happening? And those are, that can be very important. If you don't have that luxury, it's unfortunate. And it's the conversation. If you have to wear this, then you have to be doing these things when you're outside of that cleat. Have a different training cleat if this is the performance cleat. But it certainly is a problem. And this is what I don't understand, is pain affects performance.
Totally.
So
I mean, and then you get these teams that the team is sponsored by a shoe company, and you may have your superstars that the shoe fits fine, but then the other guys, it doesn't fit them at all, but they have to wear it because they're part of the team.
Yeah. I'm very encouraged though, because one of the biggest shoe company out there came out with a toddler shoe recently. And in their marketing for this toddler shoe, they said, we've done our research, and this shoe will help the development of your child's foot. And in their marketing, it said, it has a wide toe box. It has a flexible sole. Everything that we talk about. This is the biggest shoe company out there. And I wanted to get on the phone with the CEO and be like, yes, thank you. Why then? Why do you think that would change as we age? So I've seen this footwear world over the past 5 years grow at a tremendous, tremendous rate. You're seeing professional athletes. If you watch the NFL, their pregame, there's a lot of these guys taking their shoes off and doing their warm-ups barefoot. There's a lot of these guys wearing toe spacers. People are becoming aware, and I think that is why this is growing at such a rapid rate, and these high-level athletes are starting to pay attention. This doesn't make sense. I had a football player that I was working with, and he was having pain at push-off. He was a defensive lineman. So instead of addressing the problem, they switched him to the other side so he could push off the other way. I'm like, please don't do that. It's bizarre. And this was NFL. So, I mean, it's just, I am encouraged though, because I think that the research and the education is coming at a faster rate. And if the guys with the money, unfortunately, that's how things happen. If they start to pay attention, we'll see this move in a direction that I think it needs to.
Wow. Many years ago, our American Chiropractic Association Sports Council had a program or a symposium at the Nike Research Institute, and it was absolutely fascinating. The thing that was very I'm so curious about, they have so much technology that
Yeah.
works into the shoe that they, we saw a demonstration of how a basketball shoe was being tested, and they did it under high speed photography on a court. And I mean, we're talking high speed photography, and you could just determine the increments of change that go on with natural basketball related movements. And yet they still come out shoes that were compromising to the feet. Again, this was like 20 years ago or something like that. But, I give them credit, but at the same time, they're sometimes clueless,
I like to have the conversation of trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
That there's always a trade-off when you look at footwear. And I think that's where these companies are getting a little skewed. A perfect example would be cushion, for example. You'll see a lot of people walking around in very cushioned footwear.
Mm-hmm.
Why? It feels good. You put on a shoe that has a lot of stack height, you're walking around the store, you're like, oh my gosh, this feels wonderful.
Right.
It's giving you protection. It's squishy. But here is the trade-off with that. The more cushion you have between your foot and the ground, the less sensory acuity you have, the less sensory perception that you have. You cannot feel. So the trade-off for protection and comfort is sensory perception and balance. That is a problem. As we age, we lose sensation to our feet, and we also lose strength. So when you're having these conversations with, our elderly population, you're like, well, we know that falls are a very big risk for you, but here's a big old cushion shoe. Like, that's backwards to me. So, I love Michael Easter's book, The Comfort Crisis, because I think we run around in society today. It's like, how can we get to be the most comfortable? And it's like, we need to realize that there is a cost for some of this. And that's when you dance along the shoe spectrum. Wear your protection or your stability shoes when you're going on a long walk on man-made surfaces, but then take them off, or wear a shoe where your foot can actually feel the ground and start to gain strength, so that you can gain some of that, the benefits of foot strength and sensory perception.
Let's talk pasta, oats, grains, and more. I'm gluten-free, and this one item I can have without any consequences. Since we always talk about fueling our bodies the right way, that's where Guardian Grains comes in. No kidding. Their products are a massive shift towards healthy eating. Guardian Grains is all about healthy, sustainable grains that not only taste great, but are great for you and the planet. Whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, Guardian Grains has you covered with all kinds of nutrition that keep you going strong. Perfect for long days of just living life. Plus, knowing it's sustainably grown, that's a win-win. Sincere appreciation goes to the Guardian Grains for sponsorship of this episode and for making it easy to stay healthy while supporting sustainable farming. Click the link below the description to buy some of your own. You'll taste the difference.
I love this. This is juicy stuff, because the foot
Juicy, I know.
has so many sensory fibers in it. Sensory nerves are so rich in the foot that, and think about it, when your foot hits the ground, that information, and how I described to patient, that information has to go all the way up to your brain. You have to make an emotional decision on which way to pivot, move, or decide on what you're doing, even with your upper extremity. And at the same time, send messages to the motor units of the feet to do what it needs to do. It's such a complex reaction that we just take it for granted. And you're
Yes.
absolutely right. You got to feed those sensory fibers what the ground feels like. And I think that is probably one of the greatest messages that we can give to our patients. I have two things I want you to comment on. One is the thing that blows my mind that only very few athletes, especially in the NFL, get, and that is taping the ankle. That is a routine process before practice, before a game. They spat the ankle. So I'd love for you to make a comment about that, and also about the opposite end of the spectrum, the barefoot running, and how that really feeds the foot sensation.
I think it's interesting if you look at the taping of the ankle over the years, it's like it's getting bigger and bigger. And, it's like you're using a whole roll of tape on these ankles now. And it's like, hold on a second. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to that conversation of building gigantic, strong bodies on feet that just cannot handle that load. And so instead of taking a step back and saying, we need to work on, especially with ankle sprains, you can tape that thing as much as you want. But if you're not really focusing on proprioception and strength, then, these extrinsic modifications are only going to carry them so far. So, when you look at these increasing taping and all of those things, it can be beneficial, I think, in an acute situation. But we have to look at, weaning off of these types of things and really restoring function. And I think that's really important, rather than just saying we're going to tape more and we're going to build you a bigger orthotic and we're going to keep doing all of these things to mask an underlying issue that from a functional perspective can be fixed. So, it's very similar when you look at a hiking boot, for example, because patients will always say, I really need a hiking boot. And they really do not need a hiking boot. There's really, there's going to be great research coming out and looking at the increase of ankle sprains in a boot and not wearing a boot. And you put it this way, by the time you're done, you'll be like, why would I even wear that hiking boot? And it's interesting because the more you restrict mobility at the ankle, so whether I'm taping it or I have a real stiff boot, that load in those ranges have to be transferred somewhere. So if I'm walking down a mountain and I don't have good ankle dorsiflexion, I'm going to shift the load up to my knee, for example. So it's, it's not, it's just about restoring function. And when you talk about the whole barefoot running thing, it brings up like so many conversations. When we barefoot run, it completely changes, I think, how our foot interacts with the ground. Because, for example, you're not going, to put it very simply, overstriding when we run, if we wanted to just do one big kind of blanket statement, overstride is the enemy. So how far in front of my body is my foot striking? We want the foot to strike as close to our center of mass as possible.
Really? Wow.
So people will always, it's the conversation of heel strike, midfoot strike, or forefoot strike. And people are like, heel striking is like, I don't heel strike. Most recreational runners heel strike. If you were running barefoot and I'm overstriding in my heel, my beautiful calcaneal fat pad that has all these, receptors in it that are designed to give us information. If I put a big piece of cushion on there and I heel strike, I'm not taking advantage of any of that. I can't feel any of it. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to barefoot run in heavy heel strike because it would hurt. So it changes the position of how you strike. So even when I have runners that, especially if they have knee pain or hip pain, I'll say, take your shoes off. I want you to run barefoot for a minute. You can put your shoes back on because they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just told me to do that, And I'm like, it's going to be okay. You'll be all right. Your foot's very resilient. Okay. Just run barefoot for a minute. Their gait will immediately change because things will hurt if you land hot and heavy. Mm-hmm. So you run softer. You change how you land. And then we can have the conversation of, what type of footwear. There's a really cool study that looked at patients with chronic heel pain, plantar fasciopathy. And it was a small study. There were like 20 of them. And their treatment was to run barefoot in the grass twice a week for 15 minutes for 6 weeks. Which, if anybody has had chronic heel pain, you're like, that sounds opposite of everything we were ever told to do. Because we need an aggressive orthotic, I need a really cushioned shoe, and I need to keep offloading the fascia. Yeah. 19 of the 20 people in that study reported with less symptoms, both at the 6-week and 12-week marker. And it was a cohort, it was a small study, but I think this really needs to challenge our biases. How are we treating these conditions? Are we just going to continue to offload? You can't offload an Achilles tendon. Rest will make it feel better, but return to sport, you're not doing anything unless you load that thing. And I think that's the way we have to look at these foot diagnoses is you cannot continue to deload and offload. Things will get weak.
Oh my goodness.
I get a little animated there. Sorry.
No.
I'm going to jump through the computer.
No, great. No, I don't even want to go back, but I got to go back and ask you a question about some of my patients that have ankle sprains. We're seeing a rise in women's sports that is absolutely fascinating. Volleyball, basketball, soccer, lacrosse, and they're spraining ankles. They're coming in, and there's a couple of them that will not get out of that like Sweeto brace, that lace up brace, that because they're afraid. They're using that as a handicap. And I tell them, I go, that's becoming a crutch. It's weakening the mechanics. So please talk about this for just a moment. And then we'll go back to the other stuff.
I think with my athletes, I like to use objective markers because pain is a poor objective marker. You break up with your boyfriend, you're going to have more pain. So, that's where I think pain is tough. But with objective markers, especially with the athletes, so we'll test toe strength, for example. So we use a dynamometer in our offices. We'll test big toe strength, and I'll test the 2 through 5.
Yes.
FHL, flexor hallucis longus, is correlated, the weakness of that muscle, with ankle sprains. Can I talk a little biomechanics here?
Oh, sure.
Please. Yes.
So flexor hallucis longus is on the fibula, starts on the fibula. So when you press that big toe down and you have good big toe strength, it takes the fibula and it descends it. So now we have what? Something there to help what? Prevent another ankle sprain. Or reduce the risk, as I should say, of an ankle sprain. So you will often see these athletes that have chronic ankle sprains. They cannot press their big toe down. I'll pull that card out. We'll look for about 10% body weight.
Explain the card thing.
So if their foot's on the ground, and I will put, in my office, we use the dynamometer, but you could simply put a, credit card just underneath the big toe. And I'll tell them, these are the rules. You can't do what? I don't want you picking up a marble because they all want to do that.
Yeah.
The toe has to press flat, and don't let me pull the card out. You can't lift up the heel either. And your athletes, it's so funny because they'll be like, they're like holding their knee down. I'm like, this is just your foot.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Some of them, it's shocking to me. They cannot press down to get any, there's nothing even there. They should feel tension in the arch of the foot. And if we're testing the big toe, they should feel it up in the calf. And for these athletes, when they have that, they're like, wait a second, I can't do this. Mm-hmm. It's a very good objective measure and a conversation starter for me to have, saying, your big toe is how you push off. You want to be a good athlete, you better learn how to use your foot appropriately. And if you don't, where are you going to go? So those are good objective measures. The other one I love doing are calf raises, because it is shocking. So there's a study that we have that looks at per decade. So in your 20s, you should be able to do X amount of single leg calf raises. 30s, right? Very rarely do we have people hit those numbers. They'll cheat, they'll toe grip. There's your calf strain. They'll lean into the wall, but they're not powering through their foot and ankle. So when an athlete comes in and they don't have any toe strength and they can't do a single leg calf raise, and I tell them, what do you think running is? Mm-hmm. Running is a single leg hop over and over again. So when you can't do these things, it should not surprise us then when we keep seeing injuries like this, because things aren't matching. In the capacity conversation, there's a Peter Malieris, he's very big in the tendinopathy research world. And there's a study that looks at baseline return to sport for runners. So if I was going to do a single leg calf raise, the healthy individuals were holding half of their body weight for 6 reps. So think about that. I'd have to hold a 70-pound kettlebell and do 6 single leg calf raises. Most people can't do body weight, let alone hold half of their body weight. If you were to go seated and do a seated single leg calf raise, 1.5 times your body weight, 6 times. So these are the conversations I'm having with these NFL players. I'm like, listen, guys, this is the capacity that your calf has. This is the load that's going through your foot and ankle. And I always use the word opportunity, right? You got to be real wise. You got to watch your words. Yeah. There's nothing weak here. We just have opportunity to improve, but there's always room for it.
Doc, I got a question for you. And I want to see if you and I are on the same page on this, because I'll tell athletes, you don't wear mittens on your hands and do stuff where I wear mittens on your feet and expect them to be individuals, right? So, but they're always going, well, what can I do? And I'll give them exercises, but I came up with something that I go, if you're driving your car more than half an hour, take your shoes and socks off and operate your gas pedal and your brake with just your big toe. And by doing that, and I go, and you have to leave the other 4 toes relaxed. And by just doing that, you're doing what you're doing that. And I said, if you drive and you're not allowed to use cruise control, you're not allowed to use, you can just operate with the big toe. And it's just something else. What are some other exercises that people could do in their daily life while they're sitting at the office or stuff like that can strengthen their feet and their lower extremity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good question. Because it brings up such a good point. And this is the challenge I have with, in the NFL, they're like, we have all this other stuff we have to do. And now you're telling me I have to strengthen my toes. I'm like, so you have to find ways to trickle it in. I like things like that. From a balance perspective, I always say, we're brushing our teeth for 2 minutes. Balance on one side for a minute, balance on the other side for a minute. Mm-hmm. I think it's McHugh's protocol. I could be wrong on this, where they looked at collegiate athletes with ankle sprains and they were balancing on like an RX pad. Incorporating those types of things with daily activity can be extremely helpful. In the gym, when you're strength training, take your shoes off. Mm-hmm. Wear toe spacers. Just doing that can be very beneficial. You're getting sensory perception. You're allowing for toe alignment. So that's a very good opportunity. Sarah Ridge did great research where they just wore minimalist footwear, and they looked at hypertrophy of the intrinsic muscles of the foot, and just wearing the footwear showed increases in strength. So there's little things you can do that can have a great impact, and it doesn't have to be a thing. We have little toe strengtheners. So when someone's sitting at their desk, or they're just lifting, spreading, reaching their toes, I think all of those little things will go a very long way, because people don't pay attention at all. So a little bit is going to take them, is really going to carry them.
You mentioned, you mentioned, I want to elaborate on that. Every patient of mine, whether they have a headache, a shoulder pain, a wrist injury, everyone walks out with foot exercises and toe spacers, every one of them.
Yes.
And can you elaborate more on toe spacers and why they're so, because I'll put some in there and they're like, oh, my podiatrist told me that I have to wear cushy shoes and this and protect my feet. And you're telling me go barefoot, wear toe spacers, and I have a shoulder injury. Can you elaborate more on toe spacers?
I mean, I wear them every day. Just show you mine.
Right? Just happen to have some.
I just happen to have them here. Yes, it's like it's one of those conversations where after you have the conversation, people would be like, wow, that really makes sense. Why would I not do that? Let's just talk about push off. When I push off when I'm walking, you want to be able to roll through the foot. If I have a toes that look like this, think about it from balance. Wrap a rubber band around your patient's toes and have them balance, and then put a pair of toe spacers on and have them balance. Mm-hmm. It's not a trick question. It's very clear what will happen. So right from the beginning, you're going to have a change in how they're feeling the ground. That changes into how they propel forward. They're going to roll through their foot better. These are imperative with patients with bunions, for example, because the bunion is not a problem here. It's a problem here. So especially if it's flexible, you throw those toe spacers in and you get them in the right type of footwear. It's like the lowest hanging fruit. And I think from a perception, as well as the implications that has above the kinetic chain, it is a no-brainer.
Just to emphasize that whole toe strength thing, like I was mentioning earlier, that Dr. Karen Slota had me watch your program with Peter Attia, and I immediately had to go try the seated calf raise with 1.5 times my body weight. Terry, you have no freaking idea how hard that is. And I train. Right. So I go heavy. I thought my calf was going to snap, but that's a lot. Yeah. It was pretty impressive though. It's a cool way to elicit that need to strengthen, because it gives you some inspiration. You have to do it.
When you start training, especially like I'm a big fan of the seated calf raise. When you start acquiring strength there, gait is just easy, and that's what it should be. Walking, I think, is such an underrated activity. Yeah. And it's the lowest hanging fruit. Everybody can do it. And when you start to have power at your foot and ankle, that's what carries us. And it allows things like walking, which we should be able to do for very, very long periods of time, to be enjoyable and easy.
A little trick that we learned during I took a program in mild traumatic brain injury, and we had to analyze people's gaits. And to do so, being that walking is the most primitive aspect of biomechanics, you would have people walk up and back, but they would be so conscientious that you're watching them walk. So what we would do is have them access more executive level functioning. So
Yes.
we would have them walk and we'd say the months of the year, and then to step it up even more, you would say, all right, I want you out loud to say every other month of the year.
Yeah.
And that you would see, faulty mechanics come out.
Oh yeah.
And we would say, did you injure your shoulder? Because your arm doesn't, your left arm moves beautiful. The right arm, how did you know? And I go, well, give me your phone. I'm going to videotape you and you can see, right? So that was go ahead, please.
I love that neurological distraction. I have a very quick, funny story to tell you. We were working with a patient of mine, probably one of the smartest. He was like building rocket ships, very smart, socially awkward. He knew that. And we were working on his gait, and we were assessing his gait, and he was walking really stiff. And so I was like, okay. And we did the same thing. I said, I want you to out loud name states. So he starts walking down my gym and he goes, depression, anxiety, fear. And this guy starts naming the states of minds, and we just died. And he was laughing. I was like, I was looking for New York, but that'll work. And it was one of my favorites, but we all had a good chuckle there. But it does change everything when you can neurologically distract what's happening.
That's a great story.
I know.
Wow. So let me ask you one other thing in reference to something you said. I noticed that the idea of running biomechanics has evolved over the years. It used to be, people would land flat on their foot, or then it became heel toe, and then I noticed as I got older. I mean, I'm not a runner by any stretch of it. I've been running since I was 10 years old. I love running. It's a thing for my head. But I noticed my gait has changed as I age. And because I do a lot of, I've always weightlifted, I thought that my quads and my hamstrings have shortened, but my gait stride has shortened. And you made a comment about that being an important approach to natural running. Could you just elaborate a little bit more about a shorter stride and more of a minimalist shoe, maybe?
I think, so there's kind of some layers to that. I think the important thing to understand is that the ground reaction force doesn't disappear when we change different strike positions. So when we are heel striking, you have more ground reaction force going through the knee and the hip, for example. When you switch to a midfoot or forefoot strike, that ground reaction force doesn't disappear. There was more load going through the foot and through the ankle. So we can work with our runners in modifying strike pattern to change load. So if you were running, for example, and you're running and said, my hip's really bothering me, I would look at something possibly like increasing your cadence. There's research that will say if increasing cadence by 5% will decrease knee pain, and increasing cadence by 10% can decrease hip and low back pain. And the reason for that is the faster feet. So I can't really go faster feet if I'm hitting all the way out in front of me. So you have to bring the foot under you a little bit more. And that will in turn change the stride length and the strike patterns. So I think those are all, fun and, they're not so easy. Changing cadence is not easy. But, I'll have my patients listen to a metronome, like just download a metronome app. If your cadence is 150, increase it by 5%, listen to it for 5 minutes, turn it off, and try to match it.
That is beautiful.
So then you can kind of work with people on, hey, I still want to run, but I have knee pain. And that's one of my biggest kind of pet peeves when people are like, my doctor told me I can't run anymore because I have knee pain. I'm like, no, you just need to work on how you're running because it's actually very good for your knees.
Oh, That is fantastic. Okay, we are very attentive to the time here, and we have to go through one of our favorite parts is rapid fire questions. They sometimes have absolutely nothing to do with what we've been talking about.
Okay.
But you're quick on your feet, and I believe that you'll be able to handle this quite well. So
I hope
let me know. We got 5 questions. Tell me, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Dr. Conley, question number 1. What is your favorite outdoor activity to enjoy in Colorado's great outdoors?
Right now, snowshoeing and cross-country skiing.
Snowshoeing. Is that biomechanically sound?
That's why I love living out here, because every season you can like switch it up. I've converted from downhill skiing to cross-country. I can't ski with my daughter anymore. She's too good.
There we go. Okay.
You just got to get better.
Yes. I know.
All right. Question number 2, when you need a little pick-me-up, what is your go-to song?
Oh, Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
Pearl Jam. I'm a big Pearl Jam person. So yes, always Pearl Jam.
So any song there, right? Yeah. Love it. Question number 3, if we went into your room, what book would we find in your nightstand? Keep it clean. No.
Currently, Think Again, Adam Grant.
Really?
Very good. It's wonderful on how to challenge our biases and rethink what we've been really trained to believe and think.
Say the name of the book again.
Think Again.
Think Again.
Adam Grant, yes.
Yeah, great. Question number 4. If you could travel anywhere in the world for a vacation, where would you go and why?
That's such a good question. I love to travel. I have a love affair with Australia. I went to school there, and I've taught some courses there. I got engaged there, so that's always kind of my go-to spot if I had to go back.
Where in Australia?
I went to University of Newcastle, but so Sydney, Newcastle, Perth, I've kind of floated around, and they're just wonderful people, and I've always enjoyed being there.
So would you go East Coast or West Coast if you could go back for a vacation?
Really?
Probably East Coast.
There you go. Byron Bay, all that stuff. I love that area. Yeah.
Bondi Beach. Yeah.
Question number 5, and the last one. What's a hobby or interest you have that might surprise people?
Well, it's funny that you ask that, as I have my first piano Christmas recital next week.
What? I love it. Where did that come from?
I used to play as a kid, and I've been talking about feet so extensively for 20 years. I'm like, I need to tap into other parts of my existence here. So I started taking online piano lessons about a couple months ago, and I have my first piano recital.
That's awesome.
Wow. I'll bet you're good at using the foot pedals underneath the piano.
That's when I use that FHL. I'm getting some good action there with that FHL. Always barefoot. Always barefoot.
Oh, man, that's great. Okay, we got one last bonus question here. Question 5A is, what is one trick to keep your feet healthy that you do or suggest?
If you have the opportunity, and it sounds counterintuitive, even if you've had pain, just take your shoes off and just walk around. Let your foot feel the ground, even if it's for a couple minutes. Inside, grass, sand, and just start to allow your foot to feel things.
Oh, that is fantastic. Well, that was absolutely, you know what, Dr. Terry, I know we have we had so many more questions that we want to ask. These were absolutely beautiful. This hour went by so fast.
It did.
And we really thank you so much. It was fun. It was funny and extremely informative. And some of the things I can't wait to have patients listen to some of the things that you have been backing us up on and adding to that would help with their rehab or recovery or just anything.
I appreciate this so much. It was so fun. Thank you both.
Thank you.
You have a blessed day.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Crackin Backs podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Crackin Backs Podcast. Catch new episodes every Monday. See you next time.